Here's my time at 0. All right. 5 years ago, on a cold, wintry morning, I, along with my cadre of fellow ski biking students, stood at the crest of a daunting slope. What is ski biking, you ask? Well, think of a normal bike, but replace the tires with skis, and replace the brakes with absolutely nothing. With anxious looks in our eyes, our group of students turned to our ski biking instructor, Amar, for a final piece of advice. With long, shaggy hair, in his 20s, and overly chill, Amar was your typical Colorado ski bro. Thus, as we were edging off the slope to our impending doom, Amar empowered us with this piece of truly profound ski bro wisdom. Send it! Although not particularly helpful at the time, Amar's seemingly silly statement has become my life philosophy. The send it philosophy is a mindset that chooses radical faith over fear. As Christians, we're so often told that we need to follow God, whatever it takes. But why do we often fail at that? I believe the answer is fear. Today, I want to demonstrate how the send it philosophy is the antidote to 3 common fears that hold us back from what God has for us. This speech is incredibly meaningful to me because throughout my brief life, I've at times felt shackled by these fears. But by applying the send it philosophy to my life, and through the grace of God, I'm in the process of overcoming those fears. And I want that for you too. So the first fear I'd like to address is the fear of rejection. The enemy wields the fear of rejection to prevent us from accomplishing what God has for us, because we all have an innate need for human acceptance. This struggle is powerfully illustrated in the life of Afshin Ziafat, who's the pastor of Providence Church in Frisco, Texas. Despite growing up in a devout Muslim home, Afshin gave his life to Christ at age 18. But it was then that he faced the fear of rejection. When his dad found out that he had become a Christian, he told Afshin, if you're going to be a Christian, you can no longer be my son. According to Afshin, his dad was his hero. Afshin could have just remained a Muslim and retained his father's acceptance. Instead, he looked at his father and said, Dad, if I have to choose between you and Jesus, I choose Jesus. With that, his dad looked at him and said, you're no longer my son. Get your stuff and get out of here. And as Afshin was climbing the stairs to pack up his room, he cried out to God, how could you do this to me? And God told him, open the word. And when Afshin randomly opened his Bible, he turned to Matthew chapter 10. In verse 37, Jesus tells his disciples that anyone who loves their father and mother more than me is not worthy of me. In that moment, Afshin knew he had made the right decision. His story is a beautiful reminder of the importance of being willing to send it, even when it costs us so much. Rejection by those who we love the most. I've often struggled with the fear of rejection in my own life, and the depressing thought dawned on me lately. How many times have I felt prompted to go share the gospel with someone, but that little voice comes up inside my head and says, what if they think you're weird? What if they don't like you? And the answer is probably more than I'd like to admit, and that's a sobering thought. So how can we overcome this fear of rejection? I think the answer is to start small. Find little ways that you can get rejected in your everyday life and get better at it. For instance, one time my friends and I did this really crazy challenge where we asked random people in a public place to shake our hand for 15 seconds. And although it was exceptionally weird, it really taught me that getting rejected wasn't all that bad. We must respond to the prospect of a rejection with a mindset that chooses to place our value in the acceptance of God rather than the approval of men. The second fear I'd like to address is the fear of sacrifice. We all know we're supposed to follow God, but when the going gets tough, it can be a little more difficult. This struggle was illustrated in the life of B.J. Higgins. At age 8, B.J. gave his life to Christ at a youth camp. But unlike most kids, B.J. was absolutely on fire for Jesus. He was sharing the gospel with kids in the lunchroom, on the school bus, online. Wherever he went, B.J. was proclaiming the word of God. At age 15, he went on a mission trip to Peru. But unfortunately, while he was there, he contracted a rare case of the bubonic plague that left him hospitalized. But it was in this moment that BJ's radical willingness to surrender to God was on full display. According to his father, his prayer during this time was that his life be used for the furtherance of the gospel, even if it meant his death. After weeks of battling the sickness, BJ eventually lost his life. But his story is such a powerful reminder of the importance of being willing to send it, even when it costs us so much. BJ embraced the truth articulated by Jesus in Luke 9:23, that whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. This principle has touched my life in unique ways as of late. Back in September, my sister Ellie, who's now 21, left for a year-long mission trip to a remote village in the country of Chad. And during the holiday season, the reality of Ellie's sacrifice really hit my family. It's difficult. During the year that she's gone, my sister Emma is having a baby. Some of Ellie's best friends are getting married, and I'll be going off to college. And though it's hard, I'm so proud of Ellie's decision to send it. It's such an important reminder to me and to all of us. We must be willing to sacrifice for the kingdom, even when it's difficult. The final fear I'd like to address is the fear of the unknown. The enemy wields the fear of the unknown to prevent us from following God on the grand adventure that he has for us. But I believe that it is the moments when we choose to step into God's unknown that we grow the most. Take the example of Peter walking on the water. When the disciples see a figure coming towards them on the water who claims to be Jesus, Peter calls out to the figure, "Lord, if it's you, let me come to you on the water." And Jesus says, "Come." And Peter gets out of the boat and walks on the water towards Jesus. Pastor Mike Todd has an interesting observation about this passage. You see, we often tend to focus on Peter, and rightly so. But if we're being honest with ourselves, and this particularly hits home for me, I more often find myself stuck in the boat with the other 11 disciples. Because the boat of comfort I've built for myself, it feels safe. It feels secure. I can rationalize it. I can understand it. But if we would choose to get outside our boats of comfort and run to Jesus on the waters, how we would experience the fullness of God. So how can we do that in a practical way? One thing that's helped me is called the biographer's mindset. In other words, view your life as the story you'd want to tell to your grandchildren. Would you want to tell your grandchildren that, yeah, I felt called by God to go into ministry, but the sacrifice was just too great, so I just didn't do it? Or would you want to tell them, I felt called by God to go into ministry, and boy, was it scary, and boy, was it tough, but it was so worth it. Applying this mindset to my life has really tangibly impacted it. During the last year, I felt called to get outside my boat in new ways. And let me tell you, it was absolutely terrifying. It was so scary. But I felt more peace and joy walking on the uncertain waters with Jesus than I ever have living in my comfortable little boat. We must be willing to get outside of our comfort zones and run to Jesus on the water, because when we do, our faith will grow. So as you stare down the daunting ski slope of your life, ask yourself this question: what type of skier am I? I think many of us, myself included at times, if we're being honest with ourselves, are like that skier who's just edging their way down the mountain. We're following God. We're going down the mountain, but we're too afraid to find out what would happen if we truly sent it. Only when we unshackle ourselves from fear can we truly experience what God has for us. But not only that, our decisions to send it have a ripple effect that impact the lives of others. Remember our friend BJ and that youth camp where he gave his life to Christ? Well, the speaker the night that BJ got saved was a young, ill-prepared, and nervous Afshin Ziafat. Isn't that cool? The Lord used Afshin's decision to send it to impact the life of BJ, which by extension impacted so many more. These stories are a beautiful reminder of the marvelous work that God can do with people fully surrendered to him. So whether it's talking to that friend who really needs to hear the gospel, or starting that Bible study that God has put on your heart, my simple admonishment to y'all is to send it. Jesus is waiting in the waters of the unknown, telling us to come. Will you get outside your boat? Thanks.